started a long time ago for me because I had this woman I was working on, and from the very first moment I touched her, I knew that she was different from everybody else I'd ever touched. And the second I touched her, I knew it. And I asked her, I said, was there anything that, any accidents or injuries that happened to you that could have changed your tissues? And she, no. So this went on session after session, and each session I would ask, are you sure that you never had some kind of traumatic event or something that happened to you that might have changed your tissues? And no. So this went on week after week until the 9th hour, about halfway through. I stopped again. I took a breath. I said, search back through the feelings of my input on your body, and are you sure that you never had any kind of wreck or a fall or an accident or something that might have changed you in some way? And I could see that she was leafing through the Rolodex of her life. And all of a sudden her eyes lit up and she said, well, I was hit by lightning when I was 19. Is that what you mean?
Oh, wow.
And I drew a long silence, and I said, well, bless your heart, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning to your Rolfer? And she said, no, I just remembered it. It just happened so long ago, I never thought about it again. And what happened was, and she told the story, that she was a counselor at a camp, and it was a thunderstorm during the day, and she went running back to the bunk to secure the tent flaps so that the bunks wouldn't get wet. And the tent flap was tied to a nail in a tree. And just as she touched the nail in the tree got split in two by a bolt of lightning. And she was badly burned. Took her to the hospital. She stayed there a day. And she was released. And that was probably the last she ever thought of it. But when she told me that she had been hit by lightning, all of a sudden, the whole thing made sense to me. This was a very different kind of injury. This was not an injury that came from the outside and progresses through the body like this. In this case, every atom, every cell in her body was instantly lit up by millions of volts. And so here we are, we're all structural integrators. We know a little bit about fascia. So think of what that does. It turns out that the interstitial fluids are ionic by virtue of their salt content. And so that is a perfect medium to distribute all of that power everywhere to every cell in her body instantly. And that's what happened. And here I was years later feeling that every layer, every fiber of tissue in her body was boiled and burned together, that the fluid within it had been evaporated, and that the whole thing was stuck together in a way that was different from everybody I'd ever worked on, and probably different from everybody you've worked on. So, you know, in the normal course of a 10 series, you work your way through, and usually you get to a point where things just start to let go. You've untied enough knots, and then you get to a point where the deep layers and the things that are really stuck deep, they just go, okay, I get it. And they let go, they give it up. Not here. To make matters worse, she was hypersensitive and hypervigilant. Every touch elicited a pain response. And so here I am trying to work my way in according to the 10-session recipe, which, by the way, Ida Rolf was very insistent that as Rolfers, we work from the outside in. And so here I was trying to do that, and everything I inputted got bounced back at me. And so here I was 9.5 sessions in when all of this came up. And so the first thing I did was completely abandon my original plan of getting her to where I could get everybody else in 10 hours. And I developed this kind of a different way of working that I will get to in a few minutes. But the takeaway from this is that getting hit by lightning is very rare. Anybody work on somebody who's been hit by lightning? You may never. And I never had such a client again. Until long years after, when I met Miss Gloria Jean. Gloria is my wife, and in a very similar way, I was working on her one day, and I said, well, this feels really different. And then she told me that, by the way, I have permission to talk about Gloria's case, that Gloria is a 3-time cancer survivor. And the first one was Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the cure was to irradiate her like the core of Chernobyl. And so when I started putting this together, I said, well, I haven't felt anything like this since the lightning lately. And what I realized was that the radiation is very similar to a lightning strike. It lights up the body in ways that your standard normal injury doesn't. It doesn't come from the outside through, it goes right through. And it goes through everything. And so once again, we have layers of tissue that are burned and boiled together in ways that make for a very daunting series. Radiation fibrosis is not an exception to anything that we know or do as structural integrators. So all the tools that you bring to any other client would apply. What it is, it's not an exception to the rule, it's an exaggeration of the rule. It's a super exaggeration of what it means to be a random body. So in random bodies, one of the qualities is that tissues are stuck together, that they don't. So if you have 2 layers that fit together like this, if one of them wants to go this way, it can, but only as much as the other layer will let it. And if it wants to go this way, it can, but only as much as the other layer will let it. What it can't do is this, and then this, and then this. And so what you have is a body that is welded, boiled, and burned from stem to stern and from port to starboard in all the directions. The directions are left to right, front to back, top to bottom, inside to outside, and at all the levels, which are local, regional, global, and universal. So here's a body that is stuck together everywhere from head to toe on all the directions, all the levels. And when you get that, plus the hypervigilance and the hypersensitivity, it makes for a daunting, long-term project. So he says any tissue within the radiation field can be affected, including nerves, muscles, blood vessels, bones, the whole 9 yards. Organs, hearts, lungs, and that is another exaggeration of the random pattern. Because in your average random body, not every fiber of tissue is as stuck as other fibers of tissue. You have your loose spots, you have your tight spots, you have your key and strategic places where you work, where if I work here, it'll turn things loose far away. And but here, there's no distinction between lungs, heart, organ, vessels, fascia, fluids. Whatever's in the way of those proton beams gets affected. And so that's another factor making radiation fibrosis a very daunting long-term project. Here's an interesting kind of a conflict. In talking to Gloria's oncologist, this is one of the top oncologists in the entire world. Gloria was telling him about her knees. And he said, well, that couldn't be affected by the radiation because it wasn't in the field. So here's the top oncologist in the whole world says, if it wasn't in the radiation field, it wasn't affected. Yet there's a whole other body of knowledge that says that it doesn't have to be within the radiation field. that once something is fixated, that can fixate something very far away. Does that sound familiar? Okay, so that's another example of how radiation fibrosis is not an exception, it's an exaggeration of everything we know. And here he says it's impossible to cover all the potential complications because every organ system in the body can be affected. Including the spinal cord, nerve roots, plexus, peripheral nerves, muscles within the radiation. And then it gets into an interesting little sidelight here. Common manifestations of radiation treatment in Hodgkin's lymphoma survivors include neck extensor weakness, aka dropped head syndrome. So the reason, I'm pretty sure that the reason why Stubblefield and the other researchers mention physical therapy is because they don't know we exist. And they have no idea what we're capable of. And so, one of the reasons I'm here, remember the title of this symposium is Who Are We? Well, one of the things that we are is that this is a fascial issue. There are chemical and histological changes that occur in these tissues. And so certain elements are removed from the body, and then there are other things that are secreted, produced by the body. So there's a change in body chemistry. So the medical approach to all of this is to take away what shouldn't be there and introduce what should be there and isn't. So there's this chemical dance they're trying to do on this radiation fibrosis. But the point is, and this is what's really important, no matter what causes it, no matter what histological or chemical changes, cellular changes happen in the body, the end of the line is the fascia, the tissue. And that's what puts it on our table. So regardless of how it started, the end result is that you've got these layers. What are you going to do about it? And the point is that this is on our table. And so there is a tidal wave, a tsunami of work out there that we can take on. And I do believe that if we could step up to this, it could put us on the map. Here we go. This is starting to talk about what happens and what we can do about it. What you may notice is a loss of volume. Where did that volume go? A lot of it was the water. When I say water, I don't mean water per se. I mean the body's water, the body's fluids, interstitial fluids. And so there's a loss of volume, which we'll get to in a few minutes. I have some illustrations. The loss of volume coincides with the sticking together of these layers. And when the water is lost, the layers stick together. So you could have normally perhaps hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of micro layers that should be resilient, moist, fluid, resilient. And they get jammed together, stuck together like this. That's the power point. That's the point of our intervention, is restoring the volume. So on the right, we have the burns. These are on the surface, but they permeate. They go right through. And on the left, now this is a back view, but you can imagine the side view of this one. This is your droop neck syndrome. And what's important to know about droop neck syndrome is that it is not just the neck. You could see that there is a kyphotic curve forward that starts all the way down here. And so you're not going to get a droop neck back and up by working on the neck alone. It's an entire rib cage phenomenon. This spine is held in this random pattern, extreme random pattern, by all of this fibrosis and fixation. But it starts, well, it starts in the feet, as we know, but for the purpose of this picture, it starts way down here. And so the idea is to pull the spine down, to get these tissues have migrated up and over this horizon that should be here. And so the whole idea is to pull this back. And that's how, if you're going to get a head on, that's probably how you're going to do it. So if I had to title this picture, I would call it volume. Where, this is a non-radiated side, this is the irradiated side, where did the volume go? How do you bring it back? So that pretty well says what it does. The loss of volume. Okay, so again, what we're looking at, this is before the radiation treatment, and this is post. And what we're looking at is a loss of volume. And that's why this whole spine, spinal cord, the whole thing is getting squeezed by the loss of volume. And you can imagine the stress that puts on a nervous system. You can also see that the curves have changed. So this makes the body even more random. That this, as it flows into the lumbar, should be doing this, but it's not. It's doing this. This, as it goes up into the cervicals, should be doing this, but it's not. It goes unimpeded straight on forward. And so there's your droop neck syndrome. Sometimes it isn't symmetrical. So here's a big left to right imbalance. You looked at front to back imbalance. Notice also how the sleeve is choking off the core. And then I can hear you saying, wow. Wow. If I could only get my hands on that. I know I could do some good. You can. So, when we look at our recipe, every session indicates that this is a sleeve that has completely choked off its core. Where's the volume? Where's the lift? So what's happening here is an exaggeration of everything we know to be random pattern. Clavicles are rotated downward. Each rib is rotated downward. That's the other side of this. And each one of these ribs is rotated downward on both sides. And as we know, it doesn't have to be symmetrical. It can be one side more than the other. But each one of these ribs is turned in its long axis that contributes to the droop neck. So, I guess what I really want to say is that none of this violates any of our theories, our rules, our practices, but it takes it so far to an extreme that you might not think, I mean, the average person might look at this and say, this is hopeless. Even Stubblefield said, it's virtually hopeless, irreversible. And yet, there's a lot we can do. That pretty well covers the research in the field. And if you want to do more, you can, I'm sure you can find more research. Now the question is, what do you do about it? Lady, I realized that I would have to, there was really only one strategy, and that was to peel the onion in increments that she could handle, that she could tolerate. So I developed a technique that I call shaving a balloon. Now, shaving a balloon is delicate business. It's tricky business. You want to get that close shave, but if you go too far, you pop the balloon. Popping the balloon, in this case, means eliciting any pain response, even a twitch. So I developed this way of working that would peel the layers in order from the surface in, kind of like Ida Rolf said. She was pretty emphatic that as Rolfers we work from the outside in. Well, I thought about that for a long time. And it turns out that there are other modalities of body work that work from the inside out. Chiropractic comes to mind. And we all know about John Upledger. John Upledger worked in fibrocartilage, the body's deepest tissues, the cranial sutures, the spinal discs. He had a way, if he could get his hands on any wisp of fibrocartilage, he could work from the very inside of the body out. Exactly the opposite of what Ida Rolf told us to do. And there are probably many reasons why she developed this way of working and why she taught it to us and pretty much insisted that we do it that way. And one reason, of course, is that a new practitioner who doesn't have a good feel for tissue should be working from the outside in. Another reason is because she was an inventor who knew that she would not be here to oversee the application of her invention. And so she wanted to give us a safe way to do it. And it is. And I worked that way for, I don't know, 15 years. Until I started thinking about, and then I took some of John Upledger's workshop classes, started, thinking about what he did, how he was able to work from the inside out. And so, this dilemma. Ida Rolf said work from the outside in. John Upledger and other modalities work from the inside out. What do I do? Well, it turns out that I didn't have to choose one over the other, because I developed a way of doing exactly both at the same time. And so I found that I was able to access that fibrocartilage, interosseous membranes, for example, which is what we're doing in a second hour, really. I mean, a second hour is supposed to be superficial work because it's in the first 3 sleeve sessions. If you can get just the slightest bit of movement between a tibia and a fibula, you have affected the interosseous membrane. That's working from the inside out. It happens in the routine course of any structural integrator's sessions, whether they're thinking inside or outside or not. But when I really started thinking about it and doing it deliberately instead of inadvertently, I found that I was able to access these deep layers in the early sessions, as early as the opening moments of the first hour. So they're thinking inside or outside or not. But when I really started thinking about it and doing it deliberately instead of inadvertently, I found that I was able to access these deep layers in the early sessions, as early as the opening moments of the first hour. So if you are working simultaneously from the outside in, all the while you are working from the inside out, it implies that there will come a time when the two directions will meet and cross, right? That's the magic moment. Now, I heard about the magic moment in my training, but nobody ever made a big deal about it. I latched onto it, and I just couldn't let it go. The idea that you're working from two directions at once, and that when those two directions meet and cross, something amazing happens. The sleeve of the body lets go of the core, and the front of the body lets go of the back. And when you do that, I mean, that's like 8 of the 9 yards. We want to get the front to let go of the back, so I talked about the relationship of sternum to spine. When that is fixated, it can't change. And again, wherever one goes, the other has to follow. What it can't do is this. But when the front does let go of the back, the sternum can lift, the spine can drop, and the line emerges. So this happens routinely in the course of any 10 series. But when I started doing it deliberately, instead of just kind of accepting it as a side effect, I found that I was able to actually control when the magic moment happens. And for the most part, the magic moment happens for me in the 5th hour. So in this book, on page 92, I have a chapter called The Magic Moment, How I Get the Recipe to Work for Me, instead of the other way around, me working for it. And so that chapter is like my love song to the 5th hour. Throughout my career, I've had, every one of the sessions has been my favorite for a time. But I have a special affection for the 5th hour, because for me, that's where it turns around. That's where, if the magic moment happens in that 5th hour, it means that everything up to number 5 was in preparation for number 5. And everything after number 5 is in support of what happens in number 5. So when the front lets go of the back and the sleeve lets go of the core, that's what gives the body the plasticity that allows us to sculpt in the line in 8, 9, and 10. So I started thinking about that in relation to people like Donna, that if you're going to peel your way through from the outside, it could take forever for a case like this. And so what I needed was something on the inside that would work back to me. And that's in part how I developed this, even though I developed this long before I heard of radiation fibrosis. But that is a strategy that can be used, and probably, if you can do it, it's a good idea, because it will accelerate the process. It allows you to work both directions at once. Okay, so shaving a balloon, working inside and outside, inside out, outside in simultaneously. And then the third way I do this is a technique that I call tissue loading. And tissue loading comes later. The body really isn't ready for tissue loading until you have decompressed it enough to relieve the pressures that make it hypersensitive and hypervigilant. But once you reach that point, then you can start to tissue load. Now, as I describe this, I'm sure you'll recognize it. I don't know what anybody else may call it, but what tissue loading means to me is I find tissue that has any degree of looseness to it at all. It's not stuck down. And what I do is I load that against any handy bony margin. And when I do that at just the right pressure, at just the right angle of incidence, an amazing thing happens. It penetrates, goes through. And what I'm able to do is feed. And this is another idea that I haven't really heard much about. Feeding. So what I'm doing, I asked, where does the volume go? We lose volume because the water is boiled out. And you saw it in the diagrams how things lose their volume. So where does that volume go? How do you get it back? One of the ways I do it is by feeding. And I don't know if you can get a feel for what feeding is, because the question is feeding what? But how I put bodies together is by feeding from sleeve to core, which means I am translating bulk in the sleeve into volume, length for the core. When I do that, I can literally feel the body solving its geometry problems. I feel the volume. One of the things I've noticed about Rolfing bodies is that they get bigger. Not only do they get taller, we know they get taller because the spine lengthens, everything lengthens, but they get bigger overall. In other words, if you took a random body and dunked it in water and caught all the water and measured its volume, and then you Rolf somebody, do the same thing. Dunk them in water, catch the water, they would displace more water because they're bigger. There's more internal volume. And I get that by feeding from sleeve to core. I'm also feeding from front to back. I'm also feeding in all the directions, left, right, front, back, top, bottom, inside, outside. I'm feeding all of them. But what I'm mostly concerned with is the relationship of sleeve to core. So I translate the bulk in the sleeve into length and volume for the core so that the whole body can expand and find its form. So here I am feeding from sleeve to core, but the question is, feeding what? Feeding what? Anybody have an answer? Well, nobody ever told me. I never heard of it in my training. I never read it in any book. I never heard about it in any study group or conversation. So I had to make up my own word. And I call it it. The big it. Yes, the big it.
I kind of like what she said about slack and what she said about space. I think that's an important, those two things are important aspects of what
Shear.
and shear too.
Shear, that's an interesting word, because one of the ways that I shave the balloon is by working at very carefully chosen shearing angles, oblique and shearing angles. But this, okay, so you do that and something moves. It goes from one place where there's too much of it to another place where there's not enough. But what is it? That's why I call it it.
I think of it as like if I'm compressing a sperm into where it wanted to go already, and then some layer on the inside of the sperm moves, then it goes, oh, okay, I can go now. And I don't know if something gets, the volume gets greater, but it's because the things are less compressed and not because there's more of anything in there because of the space. That's how I think of it, but maybe you're saying the same.
Yes, well, what is space? Space is nothing. We make a living On nothing. We give people space. So when I talk about this it's very real to me. And this is, I spent the first 15 years of my practice naturally thinking that everybody did it like I do. I then came to understand that I don't think anybody does what I do, but you could say that for any practitioner, okay? But I'm saying it about me right now. I don't know what people are out there doing. I know what I'm doing, and I don't know if it's the same as what everybody else is doing, because when I teach this in workshops about working with it flows like a river that I can feel. It's like I'm holding a hose that has water flowing through it. My hand isn't getting wet, but I can feel the water flowing through. And for the people who I have introduced this to, their eyes light up like moon pies, like they never felt anything like that before. So that's why I got the table here. I want to demonstrate what I do, and I'm in part trying to find out for myself. Am I doing what everybody else is doing? Am I doing something different? Am I doing something strange and weird, or what? So let's.
Are they looking for someone who's had radiation treatment?
Has anybody had radiation treatment? All right. Well, anybody want to volunteer to lay down on the table? So, Lila,
Yes.
this is shaving the balloon. So I talked about the magic moment being where working from the outside in meets working from the inside out. Now, if you had a view of the skeleton, or just if you brought it up on your cell phone, right here, there is a space between the tib and the fib, and between both of these malleoli and the foot itself. A space that when you look at a skeleton, you can literally look through it. And so what I'm doing is I'm finding that space, which by the way is right, it's right here. So what I'm doing is I'm finding that space and using very minimal movement, but I'm using minimum pressure. Here's the thing, I don't work by depth. I never work 90 degrees down into a body. I'm always working at these oblique and shearing angles. And what I'm doing right now is I am feeding her from sleeve to core, through that space that you can look through between the long bones and the foot. It's right there. And as I work, when I started out, these feet were the same length. Okay? Feel this. Remember this was the first thing we did? And so, another thing about the way I work is, I don't like to tell people what to feel, but I do like to tell them what I feel. Because if I feel it, it's there to be felt. And a lot of these talks that we have been listening to talk about people's awareness of their body and what we're doing. And so as I do this work, and I tell people what I feel, I say, well, maybe you can feel that this is happening. For example, maybe you can feel that your tibia and your fibula are letting go of each other. And as they do, there's a length that's coming into here that is pretty plain to see. And you might be able to feel how much looser that turns in. And that was like 3 minutes of work. There, that is shaving the balloon. Maybe you can feel me making my way through these layers.
And you're using both hands?
I am. I'm working up with this hand, I'm working down with this hand.
Mm.
Now feel the sun. Anything to say about that?
It moves even more easily.
Wait, who's it? That even though I'm far away from, this could be far away from the field, the radiation field.
Mm.
Okay, so I talked about bony margins, and here's a really important one.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm on the inside and the outside at the same time, yes, thank you. I'm right on the edge. Okay, so here I am working my way in, and now I start to shade. Feel the difference? A random body, especially a radiation in fibrosed body, it doesn't have any bounce. It doesn't have any spring to it. So, the funny way I say it is that a random rib cage has all the flex of a Franklin stove. But as we start to turn these joints loose, you get some spring and some bounce. You feel that spring and that bounce that wasn't there before? Yeah, take a good breath. So everything I'm doing here represents, separate sessions. This would be more of, what I started would be more of a second hour. This is more of a fifth hour, perhaps. Okay, so I'm making my way in. Now I'm watching, I'm tracking. If you really were a radiation fibrosis client, I would be watching your face. I'd be watching for any twitch of resistance or like that. And there's a little bit of more bounce and spring coming. You might be able to feel that in your SI.
Yes.
Right here.
So I have a question here.
Yeah.
If you were working on, if, for example, the radiation had been through the neck, throat.
Needless line. Yeah.
Yeah, would you do neck work each session? Would you shave the?
In the process of working the tensors, yes.
Mhm.
I mean, I wouldn't just go to the neck and start working.
Right.
But yes,
Mhm.
it's a way to work the series.
Mhm.
Okay, so I've been shaving the balloon, working in tolerable increments, working my way in. When I was working on her feet, I was equally working from the inside out as the outside in.
Are you feeding from both sides of her neck now?
Yes, I've got one hand on each side. I got my thumb on her right mastoid. I got the palm of my left hand on her left mastoid, and I have my fingers down here at T1. 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 I love T1. T1 is one of my very favorite vertebrae because one of the random patterns is that the front hangs from the back. I don't know if you ever noticed that the spine is not in the center of the body. The spine is in the posterior compartment. The spine is in the posterior compartment. And because of the way the ribs and the pelvis articulate with the spine, it puts all the weight of the pelvis and the rib cage out in front of the spine. And so there is already a natural tendency built into the body for the front to drop in the front. And so that's what the line is. The line is the ability for the body to lift from the center. I forget which chapter it is, but there's one chapter called "The Line and the Spine Coincide." In the random body, there's a story we tell that the random body has no line. And in fact, there is no line that lifts from the center. But if you collect all of the vectors of force in a random body, then you would find that the resultant line of support and the spine are co-located. In a random body, the resultant vector of lift is coincidental with the spine. So a random body has a line, but it's a line with a lowercase l. It's not a line with a capital L, because the line with a capital L lifts from the center, in front of the spine. Whereas in the random body, everything hangs from the spine. The spine literally is the line. So the line and the spine are co-located. They coincide. But it's not supposed to be that way. The line that we install is supposed to be in the front of the spine. It's supposed to lift from the center. We have a study group in Austin called the Austin SI Study Group. We meet second Tuesday of every month, and we have for 5 years.
Great.
We spent an entire night talking about what is a pelvic lift. So I talked about front and back. When you stop to think about it, well, Ida Rolf had a definition for a balanced joint. She said when the flexors flex, the extensors extend. So here in this pelvic lift, I have a whole handful of flexors, and I have a whole handful of extensors. And so what I'm doing is I'm getting the flexors and the extensors to relate. And you can feel how I'm kind of bouncing my way through you. How you doing? Care to stand up?
You want me to stand like I was? I can't stand like this.
That's clear.
That's rough sideways. So can you see how much longer she was through here? It didn't take long, it didn't take much. But then, she's not a random body,
And hasn't had
and she hasn't been exposed to radiation. But these are the ways.
Thank you very much.
Lila, everybody. So, what's the takeaway? To read the literature, it's hopeless. If it's anything short of hopeless, it's because of physical therapy, very carefully tailored to the individual. The only reason why that is so in the literature is because they don't know we're here. They don't know we exist. They don't have any idea what we're capable of. No matter what the histology shows, no matter what the reason for this fibrosis is, the bottom line is that the end of the line is in the fascia. And by working these techniques, I'm able to free the layers, restore the volume, without exceeding the client's boundaries. Because if I exceed his or her boundaries and get a pain response, then I lose the trust. And that kind of loses everything. So the idea is to peel these layers in order, in tolerable increments, until I can get inside and work my way out. And tissue load to feed it whenever that is, down right into the periosteum. And when I do that, it loosens up the sleeve so that it's not choking off the core, as we saw, and increases the internal volume. And by God, if you're really lucky, and it's a good day, you'll see a line emerge. So if you want to get involved in this, there's a tsunami of work out there. Find your local cancer centers, the people who do the integrative medicine, get to know them, introduce yourself. And if I were you, when he says, well, who do I send you? I say, send me your hardest cases first. Send me the people who've been everywhere, tried everything. And if you do that, you get one success. Remember, you don't have to turn them into, some kind of raw specimen. All you have to do is get enough result that they can feel it. They go, yes, I can feel it. I can feel that there's more volume. I can feel there's less pain. I feel less choked off. If you can get that in one person, it'll fill your book. And on a worldwide basis, it would put structural integration on the map.
Thank you.
Thank you.